So, time to talk about air. And I've been talking about the four Kabbalistic worlds, and we already talked about fire and water, and I'm not going to duplicate a lot of what I said in those, or anything of what I said in those. I talked about why this conversation, and the general gist being that it's an attempt, a failed attempt to look at the infinite, because you can't really look at the infinite because we as human beings only understand things in relation to other things and through definition, and the infinite is boundless, and the idea of binding it in a label or a definition which says it is this, it is not that, means you're not looking at or talking about the infinite. The idea behind the four worlds of Kabbalah, and I'm not going into the technical terms and a lot of the technical aspects. I don't want to drive away viewers who may just be interested in some new ideas or old ideas with the terminology and whatnot. And those of you who are already into Hermetic Qabalah are well aware of them. A failed attempt to look at the infinite by looking at it through the lens of the four Kabbalistic worlds, which is looking at the infinite as earth and air and fire and water. And although they failed to give us a look at the infinite, they do give us interesting ideas. And that's always a good thing. So I recommend that you look at the fire video and the water video to see more talk about that. Today, I'm doing air, and air is called the world of formation, meaning it's where things start to take shape. Fire was will and the divine, and water was the beginning of ideas about things, and emotion, which is connection. Air is more like, it's often described as like the blueprint. So like if fire, the divine, had some notion of rest, then in water there might be some idea about laying down in order to rest. And in air, you get a blueprint for a bed. It's becoming more concrete. It is, however, still mental. Magic, according to the Golden Dawn system, that has to do with air is divination and the connection between the diviner and the querent, and the method of divination, the cards or the stones or whatever you're using to divine with. And air is primarily thought of as mental, which is communication, it's ideas, it's thoughts, it's the interrelation between things, it's connections, and in some ways, I tend to think that air really is made up entirely of the fire and water that has gone before it in certain ways, or they are made up of the air, in that if you look at like modern chemistry, water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, both of which are forms of air that have had fire applied to them. And there's a definition of fire that it is oxidization or oxidation, which is when oxygen combines with something else. It quite frequently results in there being something like flame. And air is therefore necessary to those things. So you can't have water or fire without air. The more ancient way of looking at it is that air is the receiver of those things, that air is a vessel whereby fire and water are contained and take shape, and thus the whole idea of formation. The air, the mind, the thought process, reason as creative, formative, of the making of something from the creative impulse, which is the water, and from the divine impulse, which is the will. The air takes those things and produces concrete ideas and plans of action. And this again is one of the things that divination is all about, which is learning from beyond what the will is and what the what creative impulses are in play, and it helps us to produce a plan for moving forward and in the process of creating. In some ways, I think air probably needs less explanation than the water and the fire did, because we are completely thinking creatures as is. Yes, we're emotive, and therefore water, and yes, we have will. But fire will is also the divine. It's the transcendental act of willing everything, and that lies behind and moves through everything, and therefore it's extremely important for us to tune into it, to align our will with that will in order to really experience the fire. And the same with emotion. Emotion connects us to everything, but emotion is also the divine moving us about. The air is, you could make an argument for divine thought, and there are philosophers who would say that that's easier to tune into, because the divine, once you get to an airy level, reasons, and since the laws of reason are immutable, all you need to do is reason, and you're partaking in the divine thought process. At least that's the way a lot of ancient philosophers thought. And it is true that if you learn the laws of logic and reason and syllogism and follow those rules, that while there can be disagreements, there's a way to resolve them, in that you've got this set of rules to work with in order to come to a conclusion. And that if you think of pure reason and pure mentality as something like mathematics, ultimately disagreement falls away, because there is just truth. This number plus that number equals this other number. In science, you come up with a theory about the way something works. You come up with an experiment. You come up with an idea that if that theory were true, certain things would happen. You concoct an experiment to see whether or not those things happen. If it doesn't happen, the theory wasn't true, and if it does happen, we'll assume the theory is true until we discover some other theory that also explains it, or explains it better, or until some part of the theory can't be validated through experiment, or whatever the case may be. But it's not ever brought down to opinion or argument based on the way you feel water or the way you will fire. It's about it's about pure reasoning through mathematical, like, logical rules. And the idea of the infinite in air would be that those rules are universal, and therefore, so long as we have the same set of facts, we have to come to the same conclusions, because we have these rules, and if we follow them using the same set of facts, we're going to come to the same conclusion. Now, in practice, people do come up with different theories, and experiments might be able to validate more than one at a time, but what you still have results of some sort that can be agreed upon are results and that have some sort of meaning, and it isn't like the endless conflict of, well, my opinion is this and your opinion is that, or I feel this and you feel that, or this is what I will and this other thing is what you will. We have something actual in front of us that is true, and we know it is because it obeys this set of logical rules. Divination doesn't necessarily work that way. Real true divination might. I mean, I'm very, very educated in tarot, and in the schools that I've been through, there are logical rules about tarot and divination, and that have to do with correspondences and associations. And you go out into the internet now and listen to people talking about divination. It becomes sort of apparent that, well, they're not really talking about divination as much as they're talking about fortune telling. They're all going with intuition in their gut, and I think that's probably more watery than airy. And there's a lot of argument about it. Well, I don't have to obey these correspondences. I can just go with my intuition, and you can, but that's not airy. That's not divination. That's just fortune telling. That's intuiting things that can help people. It's not a bad thing. But divination, the way the Golden Dawn was thinking about it when they made divination, when they said divination was airy, was a strict analysis. Astrology is a form of divination as well. I mean, rules and mathematics, and it follows the methodology of science very closely. Yes, there are intuitive astrologers who will look at the facts and figures and come up with something based on an intuition. And divination is a really great way to develop intuition. I can think of at least one philosopher who would think that there's an intellectual intuition that lies beyond mere impulse and emotion, which is kind of like the subconscious making connections based on reason, because you've programmed it with all of these rules and order. And in any event, that's where intuition comes into intersection with reason in air, and that's the subconscious. We said that fire was super consciousness, the divine, and that water was the subconscious mind. The air is the self-conscious mind, and by providing the subconscious mind with information, the subconscious mind can compute things and feed them into the conscious mind, and then there's a partnership there. But when we start to think about ourselves as human, this conscious mental reasoning faculty is one of the primary features of our conscious minds. Yes, on one level, consciousness is awareness, sensation. I know that I exist. I know that, that exists. But the mind is capable of so much more, in that it's capable of figuring out how to make this. And like I said, it's the blueprint for the things of creation. How to get in touch with all this? In the other videos, I've pointed to the form of magic, and again, divination is a great way, a great magical method for bringing yourself more into tune with the infinite concept of God or the universe or the gods as air. as is any other sort of communicative, mercurial sort of endeavor. So writing, keeping a journal, even if it's just to record facts, is an airy process that gets you more in touch with air. Um, Conversation, socializing is an airy process. Music, while it partakes of fire and water, if it's written down in musical notation, and if you're following any sorts of rules about structure, even just the rules of the way you feel about music, it's probably an airy thing. Um, and for the other two, I mentioned invocation or invocation and evocation. Those are also good ways of getting in touch with air. Excuse me. Um, Invoking deities like Hermes Mercury in particular, or solar deities, would be very useful in attempting to get a grip on, attunement with the airy qualities of the universe. Um, I'd mentioned also previously the Fire Elemental King Dijin and the Water Elemental King Nixa. The Air Elemental King is called Peralta. Um, he is friendly to humans. He is used to working with magicians and witches, and he has good spells to give that are of an airy nature, that involve the exploration of your own mind or the understanding of the minds of others. Um, so, if you are at a point in your work where you're interested in talking to spirits or evocations, Peralta is um, a relatively safe choice. You want to follow all the proper protections and everything, of course, but um, there's a lot to be learned from Peralta. Um, and then, of course, as with the previous videos, there's always the tarot cards involving air, and let's look at those. So here's a rundown of the tarot cards that represent air. Let's see here. Doo-doo-doo. So, the first is the Ace of Swords, which is probably the most airy of the deck. Um, it contains within it the entire suit of swords. Um, this would be the one to start meditating on if you want to get in touch with air, get in tune with air, get some insights into air. Um, Next would be the signs, the airy signs of the zodiac, and that would be the Lovers, which is Gemini, Justice, which is Libra, and Aquarius, which is the Star. Um, Aquarius and the Star has a special place in ceremonial magic. It, generally speaking, is the power that you invoke from the East. So in things like the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram and the Opening by Watchtower, calling circles, calling the quarters, Aquarius, in most cases, would be the East. Um, Next would be the entire suit of swords, as you can see laid out here. You might make special note that There is plenty of water apparent in some of them as well. The 2 has water as behind the central figure. The 3, there's rain. We have water in 5 and 6 and 8. One interesting thing is that a surefire sign of air having a presence within a tarot card is the color yellow, as seen here in the 7 of Swords, and there's a bit of it in the 10 of Swords. Next, I wanted to look at these. You'll see they all have a great deal of yellow in them. The Fool and the Magician are actually both very airy cards. The Fool, among other things, is I've mentioned in the previous videos that in the Hermetic Qabalah there are Hebrew mother letters in the alphabet, and the Hebrew alphabet is all assigned to tarot cards. The mother letters are all particularly assigned to an element, and the element that is assigned to a tarot card as one of the mother letters, in this case the first letter of the alphabet, Aleph, is the Fool. The Magician represents the planet Mercury, which is considered to be an airy planet, and in this Rider-Waite deck at least, Rider wanted the background to be yellow for just that reason. Strength is a fire sign. It's Leo. I threw it up here because of all the yellow in it, and to just remind you that you might find an element where you least expect it, so you've got to keep an eye out for them. In this case, Leo has something to do with air, and air is very complementary to fire. I mean, air makes fire burn brighter, etc., etc. And let's take a look at the knights. As I mentioned in the previous videos, all of the court cards represent a particular element, and in the case of air, it is the knights that are all to some extent airy. The Knight of Swords would be considered air of air because the sword suit has to do with air, and the position of the knight is of air. The Knight of Wands would be air of fire, the Knight of Cups would be air of water, and the Knight of Pentacles would be air of earth. As mentioned in the other videos, so we've seen this with the King and the Queen as well, with the Kings being fire and the Mothers being water. We'll get to the Princess in the next, or Princess or Page in the next video. The Knights are not the only card in this position. There are numbers that are associated with the elements as well. In the case of air, that would be the aces, the sixes, and the tens. So in all of those instances, the ace, 6, and 10 of swords would be air of air, and the others would be air of fire, air of earth, air of water, depending on what suit they are. We've previously discussed in the other videos how to meditate on these. The short of it is meditating on the tarot could take 3 sort of forms that I'm aware of. One is just gazing at the card and attempting to let it get in touch with you and being aware of it. The other would be picturing the card as a doorway and walking through it into the world of the card and imagining what's there and interacting with it. And the last one would be imagining that you are the card in as much detail as you possibly can, making it as real for yourself as you can. The thing about these forms of meditation is always not to direct your imagination past a certain point. You let your imagination take you into the world and see the world, or to become the card, and get all the aspects of the card down in your mind. But at some point you step back and then let things happen to you rather than making them happen with your mind. Um, as I said, more detail in the other videos. The interesting thing that I wanted to leave you with is, again, similar to what I've said in the other videos, and that's that air is necessary to our life. Our blood cells are pumped up to our lungs where the iron in them bonds with molecules of air, which the blood then takes to every cell in the body and feeds these molecules of air to every cell in the body. And given the principle of you are what you eat, you are air. And I will leave you with that, and I hope to see you for the Earth video. Thanks for coming along. Have a good one.